Welcome to Audacity in the Arts, Reviving Cultural Relevance. My name is Suzanne Hermery, and I am Executive Director for the Red Deer Arts Council. Tonight's creative conversation event is hosted in conjunction with the Arts and Culture District Collaborative as part of the Downtown Neighbourhood Alliance, with the support from the City of Red Deer and also Alberta Culture Days through the Government of Alberta's Ministry of Culture and Status of Women. Please note that tonight's event is being filmed and it will be available on our YouTube page in the coming weeks to review and share some of Alex's thoughts that resonate with you. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that this ground where we live, dance, share stories, sing, and serve community is at the meeting place of Treaty 6 and Treaty 7. Treaty 6 to the north of the river and Treaty 7 to the south. We're also part of Odapemiswak, which is of the Métis Nation Division 3. I just found that word today. I don't know, I've been looking for something that's Red Deer's called for a long time. Odapemiswak. We acknowledge the many Blackfoot, Cree, and Stoney First Nations, Michif, and Inuit peoples who have and continue to live on this land, creating, protecting, and advocating for its health. As we gather here, we commit to learning, listening, and acting in the spirits of reconciliation and gratitude with all our relations. Hi. Okay. I have a script tonight. I'm going to follow it. We are grateful to have representatives here from both the offices of our new Member of Parliament, Burton Bailey, and our MLA for Red Deer North, and the Minister of Primary and Preventive Health Services, the Honourable Adriana LaGrange's offices. We're also grateful to have City Councillors Diane Weincheese and Cindy Jeffries this evening, being present to engage in this important conversation. I would like to invite Councillor Weincheese to share some remarks before we get started, but you don't have to get up on the high stage if you don't want to. Oh, she's eating. Councillor Jeffries, would you like to say a few words in her stead? That was well timed. Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Too fast, Diane, because I'm not going to be very long. Good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you and to be here for this event. As we live in very interesting times, I can't think of a better time to have a conversation about relevance and the importance of arts and culture in our community. In many ways, I think probably all of us in this room, look to arts and culture to help us interpret the time that we're in and to make it through. So let's enjoy the conversation tonight. I'm sure it will be very fruitful. And Diane, are you finished chewing yet? Thank you very much for hosting.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I know we're all arts and culture fans, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And I look forward to this evening and learning and ways that I can take this forward. Of course, it's campaign season. And arts and cultures is a really important piece for our city. So when you're attending forums, all I ask is you ask candidates about their commitment to arts and culture. Mm-hmm. Too many times when we do budget deliberations, the good stuff falls away. And arts and culture, community gatherings, music festivals, the artist support, for me, that's so integral for us to be a greater city. So thank you for all your commitment that you make to arts and culture. Tell your friends to support arts and culture and candidates that can move our city forward. We've done good, we've done well, but I think we can always do so much more better to put Red Deer on the map. So thank you very much. Look forward to learning this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
And we are grateful for your commitment as councillors to the leadership of the city as well. So a couple of words about tonight's event. We will be starting with Alex's talk, then have a Q&A session, after which we hope to have conversations that will continue and be sparked to connect over some refreshments over there. There is also a bar over there. There is also an accessible washroom over there and more downstairs, if you're not familiar with this building. There's also an exit over this way and an exit that way. And I'm learning all the things. There's another one there, but it's also in use by another group, so we will leave it to them. We encourage you to be thoughtful and ask questions. And if you haven't yet read Alex's book, you are able to borrow the ebook or the audiobook editions from Red Deer Public Library through the Libby app. We also have a few copies at the back that you might be able to get signed if you want to buy it. If you're lucky, we have a couple available to borrow as well, because we like hard copies in our office. So how we got here. Last fall, I was at my desk attending a webinar with Business for the Arts featuring Alex Sarian as he talked about the principles behind his new book, The Audacity of Relevance. I didn't have any headphones that day, so the sound was up, and my colleague Scott quietly turned his attention to my screen as the conversation went on. We immediately were intrigued, and it so happened that Indigo actually had 2 books on the shelves, so I picked one up that evening. However, as Scott will tell you, I didn't read it fast enough, so he had to go and get the other copy the next day so he could jump on the bandwagon. And therefore, a thought revolution was born. Christina read it as well, and I bought the audiobook, and then we realized that our city council should also read it, so we bought a whole box of books, and we gave them out to city council, starting at our soiree for the 50th anniversary back in February. So we want to look at this election year as an opportunity to reframe our community's purpose as a livable city. A box of gifted books, and many conversations later, we connected with Alex to join us for this conversation series. As we know all too well, the arts and culture sector is in crisis, a crisis of relevance. Even before the pandemic, we were grappling with dwindling audience sizes, shifting trends in philanthropy, and addressing social challenges. Experts have been documenting the decline for decades, not years. At the core of Alex's international career is his conviction that cultural organizations must embrace a greater civic purpose, one that builds a new business model, one based on the social impact of the arts. Through his book, Alex engages in conversations with leaders from across industries to paint a potential future for arts organizations, a future built on measuring our sector's successes by how positively we can influence the many local communities that surround us. It doesn't matter if you're a seasoned nonprofit leader, a volunteer board member, or a community arts supporter. Alex will inspire you to see the world of arts and culture for what it truly is, filled with possibilities for reinvention. So, Alex Sarian is the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Audacity of Relevance, Critical Conversations on the Future of Arts and Culture. You can get it from ECW Press. And he is president and CEO of the Werklund Centre, formerly Arts Commons, where he is responsible for leading the $660 million Arts Commons Transformation Project, the largest cultural infrastructure project in Canadian history. Prior to moving to Calgary in 2020, he spent 18 years in New York City, where he served as a senior executive at Lincoln Centre for the Performing Arts. A proud member of the 2022 class of Calgary's top 40 under 40, he holds undergraduate and graduate degrees from New York University, is a graduate of the CommunityShift program at Western University's Ivey School of Business.
Sorry.
And he was an inaugural graduate of the Impact Program for Arts Leadership at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business. Is something wrong here?
No, it's
just
all,
hilarious.
No,
Okay, great.
Just amazing.
It is just amazing. It's true. Okay, so that is the bio. But now it is time for the important part of the evening. I stop talking and he starts. So please welcome Mr. Alex Sarian to the stage.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Susan.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me?
No, not yet. I got
So
to turn
none
up
of
the
these 3 microphones. You can hear me? Okay, good. Thank you so much for welcoming me. It is so humbling to be here. and in a room full of people that love the arts, and not just because you are practitioners, but because you understand the impact that it can have on a community and a city. And as somebody that's relatively new still to Calgary and Alberta, having seen and experienced firsthand the work that we're doing and how it's taken off, I kind of want to shout it from the rooftop so that everybody can do it and that we can all sort of join this exciting project and initiatives together. I don't have script, so I will, you'll bear with me as I stumble through this. And most of it, interestingly enough, I love conversation. I love talking to people. The entire book is predicated on the fact that I'm not that smart, so I need to talk to people that are and ask really good questions. So the fact that I talk first and then we have a Q&A feels backward, so bear with me. A little bit about myself beyond the bio, or the programs that I attended that I couldn't recall until you read the bio. I was born in Toronto. Sorry, there's a lot happening right here. I was born in Toronto, but at the age of 3, my family moved to South America. And I was raised in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in a community and in a culture where you had kindergarten teachers just bringing out a guitar and teaching through music. Not because they had degrees in music, but because it was part of the cultural celebration of who you were. I was raised in Argentina, and then I moved to New York, as one does when you are fascinated by the arts, because apparently there's only one place you can go if you want to work in the arts. And I will talk about how that is completely untrue. And I moved from a city and a culture where arts belong to everybody, regardless of your background, regardless of your profession. I moved to a city where the arts were available to the privileged few that could afford a ticket. And in a city like New York, that just felt so counterintuitive. And so I moved into my background's in education. I wanted to be a first grade teacher. I was a very good first grade teacher. And the first thing that I loved about learning education is the first thing they tell you is, if a student in your classroom is not learning, it is never the student's fault. You need to figure out how to do it differently. And that's how the idea of relevance to me just started, it got embedded into my DNA. It's never about, it's never the recipient's fault, it's who's giving the information and who's delivering it. And I'll talk about how that weaves its way through the book. I eventually end up in arts education and working for a lot of cultural institutions that were trying to figure out how to make the bottom line work. I was working off Broadway. So just tangent, I'm gonna do this a lot tonight. There's the Alex you get when the camera's on, and there's the Alex you get when the camera's off. So the camera's on right now. But you'll get the Alex when the camera's off later. So I was working off Broadway for a theater company, and this was around 2009, 2010, when the economic recession in the US was hitting really hard. And I was working, leading education programs for an off-Broadway theater company, and they would say, we need to cut the education program because we're not selling enough tickets. And I'm like, you're seeing the whole thing backwards. I said, there is far more money, particularly philanthropy and contributed revenue. There is far more money in education than there will ever be in the arts. The fact that you are cutting education to feed the arts is so backwards. And we were talking a little bit about business, and to me, business is super important. So I move into arts administration as a graduate degree, and I start studying the intersection between education, arts, and business, which at the time, now it feels so important, but at the time, really nobody was doing it. This is probably 20 years ago. And what I found moving into Lincoln Centre, so Lincoln Centre, I get a phone call from a professor of mine from NYU that says to me, I have to hire a director of finance. And at Lincoln Centre in 2012, when they said director of finance, what they really meant was somebody with a Harvard business degree that could understand finance in the way that Harvard did. And he said to me something really interesting that I'll never forget. He said, I'm meeting and interviewing really smart people. But when they look at a spreadsheet, They don't know if they're looking at cars, sneakers, young people, artists. And I need somebody that can look at a spreadsheet and understand the value of what it is that we're doing. So he said, will you come work at Lincoln Centre? And I was like, okay, twist my arm. I ended up doing 7 years at Lincoln Centre. And one of the things that was fascinating in working in education is we went from being the tiniest little department in the institution to the fastest growing department because we realized that Lincoln Centre had a reputational problem. It was being seen as this elitist institution that was only for the privileged few. And through the work that we did in education, we were able to demystify that, and we were able to reach more New Yorkers than we'd ever had before, diversify our audience base, and in doing so, increase all of our revenue streams. So we became the fastest growing financial department in the history of Lincoln Centre, and we still never charged $1 to families. So I'll talk about how it makes its way into the work that we're doing now. The other thing that was really interesting is that I eventually started overseeing international consulting at Lincoln Centre. So for somebody that had spent their entire life thinking, I need to go to New York because that's where the real work happens, all of a sudden I was traveling the world, which is an incredible privilege, traveling the world and working on projects on behalf of Lincoln Centre. And that was a very humbling experience because I realized very quickly that what worked in New York doesn't necessarily work in Beijing, and what works in Beijing doesn't work in Mexico City, and what works in Mexico City doesn't work in Calgary. And so you had this team of consultants from Lincoln Centre and from New York feeling like they were God's gift to arts administration, walking into communities we knew nothing about and failing, quite frankly. And so we realized early on that instead of walking into a community and figuring out or assuming we had all the answers, we needed to start asking the right questions and surrounding ourselves with community members that could help us answer it. That's why these questions are answered completely differently in all of these different communities. And so when I get a phone call from Calgary saying, would you consider coming out here and working on this project and making sense of this project, I said, well, let me ask around and let me talk to people from Calgary. And within 6 months, I said, absolutely, I want to come out here and I want to do this work. A little bit about the project. Suzanne mentioned it, but we actually broke ground in December. So if you ever come to Calgary and you go to where Olympic Plaza used to be, still is technically, across the street from City Hall, you will see a giant construction site where we're building the largest cultural infrastructure project in Canadian history. By the time we're done, we will have over 12 stages across 1 million square feet in the downtown core of Calgary. We will be the largest performing arts campus in the entire country, which is super, thank you. It's not done yet. It's not done yet. I still have time to mess it up, but it's super exciting. And the reason I wrote the book is because a lot of people would say to me, how is it possible that this is happening? How is it possible that this is happening in early 2020s on the heels of the pandemic? How is it possible that it's happening in Calgary, which I have come to learn apparently is not considered the cultural capital of Canada, shockingly, although we're changing that. And so I wanted to write this book because there was so much happening behind the scenes, and it would have felt so incomplete for me if people just watch this campus been built and never understand the questions that are being asked behind the scenes. Because ultimately the questions that are being asked behind the scenes, in this case, are serving Calgary, but there's no reason those questions cannot continue to serve other communities and build build similar projects and experience similar successes. When I moved here, I still have a board, and they're wonderful, by the way, because the camera's on. No, they're wonderful, and I would say it if they're here. But I had a board full of developers, and they would ask me all these questions about how would I make sense of this project. People have been talking about it and planning it for over 10 years. It was originally called Project 2010 because it was supposed to have been delivered in 2010. And they were like, listen, this project is either dead in the water or we're finally ready to execute on it. And I remember looking at my board, again, many of them developers, and I said to them somewhat flippantly, I said, anybody with enough money can build a building. The true transformation is whether or not people are going to care about it. And so that was the first moment when we started talking about what is this going to mean to Calgary? Is it going to be relevant to Calgarians? And so every single success that we've experienced, I think, is a testament to the fact that we have leaned into this value proposition, that we are building something that is in service to our community. It's in service to our growing city and our diversified needs. And every step of the way, to me, is another huge testament to the fact that this philosophy is paying off. So in the book, I ask this question of every person I interview. I say, what's more important, the intention of the artist or the perception of the audience? And by design, it's a trick question. Because if you're an artist in the room, if you are an avid theater goer, you know that the magic happens in that tension where the intention and the perception meet. But what I find fascinating is just like in the first grade class, that tension between intention and perception, like if I take that question and I apply it to the first grade classroom I taught in, and I ask you the question, what's more important, the intention of the teacher or the perception of the student? What would you say?
Student.
The perception of the student. Right, thanks. Interestingly enough, this question also reemerges in the 2010s, interestingly enough, through the lens of HR. You have a lot of HR professionals in the time of sort of the Me Too movement asking the question, what's more important, the perception of the victim or the intention of the alleged perpetrator? Again, the answer to that question is the perception of the victim. So how is it possible that when we take this question and we apply it to so many different settings, it's ultimately so important how it's being received, how it is being consumed? And yet, for some reason, in the arts world, and I'm overgeneralizing this, but in the arts world, we still have this hangover of saying what happens on stage is the most important thing. And we are God's gift to arts and culture, and oh my God, aren't you lucky that you're watching me perform for you tonight? And we still have this thing, and and a lot of us in the arts talk about artistic excellence, and I'm like, yeah, but artistic excellence as defined by whom? And I'll never forget this. There was a friend of mine who ran a theater company, and this is where we start pivoting from the philosophy into the business. I have a friend of mine used to run a theater company in Berlin. Now, this is when Europe was funding the arts far more generously than it is now, although you look at it now and it's still incredibly generous from a public government perception. But he would look at me and say, almost boasting, he would say to me, I could plan an entire season of plays by Bertolt Brecht, not sell a single ticket, and the government will still give me all my funds. And he would giggle at me as he shared that. And I was like, well, then who are you doing it for? What's the point? And he didn't have to care. He didn't have to ask himself that question because he lived in a business framework that didn't force him to. What I love about relevance, not unlike trust, is that you don't get to decide for yourself if you have it. Like, I don't wake up in the morning and say to myself, I feel like being relevant today. What I love about relevance and the complexity of relevance is that it is always bestowed upon you. You need to earn it. And just because you are relevant today does not guarantee that you will be relevant tomorrow. It is this constant struggle and constant questioning. And I think the arts world, and I think we need to do some of that a little bit more in the arts world. So the value proposition, I start by talking about the value proposition of the arts. And the first person I interview, and mind you, I interview people from around the world, but the first chapter I interview the CEO of the Calgary Library. For those of you that have been to the Calgary Downtown Library, one of the most stunning libraries on earth. And not just from a design perspective, but from a philosophical value proposition. When I was interviewing in Calgary, my wife and I flew out to Calgary for the final interview. I have now come to learn that Calgary loves to talk about itself as being the third most diverse city in Canada. And I'm not going to lie, I went to Arts Commons, And I pretended to be a fly on the wall, and I would look around and I would turn to my wife and I was like, I don't see the third most diverse city in Canada right here. I walked 2 blocks east to the library and I was like, oh, this is it. And it wasn't accidental, it was intentional. You have newcomer services, you have immigration services, you have education services, you have counseling. And I think to myself, here's an institution that has redefined its value proposition, has redefined its relevance, and is thriving as a result. I actually think library systems in general are a fascinating case study of sectors that have redefined their relevance. They haven't drifted from their mission at all. It's not mission drift. It's actually a redoubling down in terms of what matters to them. And I think libraries in general are fascinating case studies, and in particular Calgary. Calgary's is a fascinating case study. So I interviewed Sarah Mueller, who's the CEO of the Calgary library system. And hearing her talk about how they've completely rethought the role of the library in society. And this is not about us, and she says this is not about being gatekeepers of information. This is not about us having something that you need. This is about us creating a space where you can come and learn and share from each other on your terms. And I thought to myself, if Calgary can do this with the library, it can do it with the Performing Arts Centre. And every time we have a success, whether it's fundraising, whether it's design, whether we're breaking ground, I call Sarah up and I say, we're following in your footsteps. That value proposition is really the most important thing. It's the most important thing, because every chapter of the book essentially talks to an area of our business. So there is a chapter on programming, there's a chapter on fundraising, there's a chapter on advocacy, there's a chapter on... The book is meant intentionally to read to people, or it's meant for people that have said to me, oh, I like what you're doing, I just can't afford to do that. Or I don't know how to implement it within the framework of my organization. And so this book is very much speaking to, okay, you have the value proposition that lives in every corner of the institution, and then every chapter does a deep dive into different departments or different areas of your business. And the reason I start with the value proposition is because it is very quick to, any one of us can tell very quickly when an organization is putting the cart before the horse. And it's very, you can tell very quickly to say, oh, this is a marketing tactic and not actually a value proposition shift. And so the most important thing is changing the DNA of who we are. And that is not something that others outside of the arts world can fix for us. That is a challenge that I present to ourselves within this community. 2 years ago, or now 3 years ago now, there was an article in the Globe and Mail by Josh O'Kane, and he was talking about all the reasons why it's so much harder to run an arts organization today than 10 or 15 years ago. And there's this laundry list: inflation, escalation, audience trends, philanthropic behaviors are changing. All of the things are true. And I remember I called Josh up and I said, I loved your article. You're absolutely right in naming all of these things that are making our jobs more challenging: escalation, inflation, tariffs, all these things. But I said nowhere on that list was our inability as arts leaders to actually figure out a way through this. Because all the things you listed are impacting every sector right? So like I have friends in construction. All the things that you list are also making their jobs harder. But you don't see an article in the paper about, oh, woe is me, I need help. So where in this narrative do we hold ourselves accountable to figuring out a different way through this? And this idea of relevance to me is so important because it actually requires curiosity and humility, and it requires us as arts leaders to say, we don't have the answers to this, but we can figure it out together. And I feel like that's what we're doing in Calgary. So the value proposition was super important, and we've tweaked it. And there are things that we've changed, and I'll talk a little bit about more of them as I give you a quick tour of the book. The first one I'll talk about in terms of activating the value proposition is programming, because that's normally the first point of contact that an audience member has with a cultural institution, is buying a ticket and going to a show. There's an anecdote And for those of you that have seen me talk before, I apologize because I still haven't found a better one to articulate this point. But I was teaching at a business school in New York, at Pace Business School. My memory's not that bad. But what I love about Pace University as opposed to NYU where I went, or Hunter College or others, or Columbia, is that Pace University is one of the only post-secondaries in New York City left that is predominantly first-generation Americans. You don't have legacy families, you don't have... And so I'm teaching this business course, and I'm the only white person in the room. And we're talking about audience development, and we're talking about financial barriers to cultural participation. And this one student, he raises his hand and he says to me, he says, "Mister, how much did you pay for your shoes?" And I'm looking at my loafers and I'm like, I don't know, maybe $75, $80. And he says, "I paid $300 for my Nikes. I'm taking my girlfriend to see Beyonce at Yankee Stadium next weekend and we're dropping $700 to go see it." He says, "Just because of the color of my skin, the zip code that I live in, or my nationality, do not assume that I do not have disposable income." He says, "If I'm not going to Lincoln Center, it's not because I'm poor, it's because I don't care." And I was like, oh my God, who's teaching the course here? But that to me, it hit me hard. Because I thought to myself, we have been making programming choices that are not appealing to a wide enough audience. And then we're actually blaming the audience and saying we need audience development initiatives and we need to develop you into better audiences. I mean, when you stop and think about it, it is truly offensive. The other example that I find horrible is when you see me trip on myself is because I actually want to give an example, but the camera's on, so I'm not going to give an example. But when you have organizations that put on shows or put on exhibits or put on, exercise their artistic mandate, realize very quickly that nobody's buying a ticket, and their first response is, oh, we need to lower the financial barrier. We need to offer free tickets. And I think to myself, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot twice. On the first hand, you're producing something that nobody wants to see. And to add insult to injury, then you're giving it away for nothing. The perfect example to counter that is, for those of you that are familiar with Hamilton, the musical, they made it very clear that Hamilton was the hottest ticket in New York City. The second you establish value is when you create access to it. So a wonderful foundation in New York City said, we want every middle schooler in New York to see this as part of their social studies curriculum. And that foundation ponied up millions of dollars to create access and to lower the financial barrier. But they lowered the financial barrier to a product that people wanted to consume. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about product and consumption, and these are a lot of business terms. And I don't mean it, I don't mean to cheapen our experience. I don't mean to cheapen what it is that we do. But there's so many studies around how people consume and interact that we have never, as a sector, I think, fully understood. Another example I'll give you, and I'll mention the name because it's public information. Look at the camera as if I'm going to get in trouble. But 15 years ago, 18 years ago, Lincoln Center Theater, which is a theater company on the Lincoln Center campus in New York, they said they were being accused of being inaccessible, of being too expensive. And they came up with this amazing idea. They said, we're going to offer $25 tickets to day of shows as long as people line up before work. All right, let's try it. So they try it. What they find out is that the people lining up at the box office at 7:30 in the morning on the weekdays are the retirees that live within a 3-block radius that just yesterday were paying $75 a ticket. And again, to me, that is when you have these good intentions but lack the intentionality, you have all these mechanisms, but you haven't fully understood or grasped the value proposition. When I first moved to Calgary, I remember saying to my team, I said, I want a heat map of where people are coming to us from, because we have that information. If you buy a subscription, if you're a single ticket buyer, if you're a donor, we have your postal code. We know where you live. It sounds so evil. But data is magical if you know how to use it. So I asked my team, I said, give me a heat map of where Calgarians are coming from. And I won't lie, it's very impressive. Like the history and the legacy of Arts Commons that I inherited, this was not an institution that was broken. It was incredibly successful. But I remember saying to them, I remember, for those of you that are familiar with Calgary, that there's the northeast quadrant, which is predominantly not white. And when you looked at our heat maps, one could say, oh, there's a cultural desert, because nobody's coming to us from the northeast. Saying cultural desert in the northeast of Calgary is like saying that the South Bronx is a cultural desert. It is ridiculous. Now, so the question that we always ask is who's not coming and why? And I think that's the question that we all need to ask ourselves. And even as I look around here, I was asking Suzanne, I was like, okay, what's my mandate? What's the rallying cry tonight? And as I look out, I'm like, you guys, you know this. The question that we need to ask ourselves in this room is who's not in here and why, and then figure out how to reach out to them. Because we believe this. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir in many ways, but we need to then go out there and convince others. So and I'll give you a perfect example of how programming has the ability to lean into that value proposition. So I get that heat map. This is 2020, pandemic is doing its thing. And we're one of the first organizations to do outdoor pop-up concerts. And this is not rocket science, everybody's doing them. But we did it because we heard a couple of things. The first one is, the artist community was saying to us, the gig economy is drying up. If we do not get gigs, you're going to cut the ribbon on this performing arts center, and there's going to be no artist community left. So we were like, okay, we need to keep supporting the local artist community. And if doing these outdoor pop-up concerts is going to help them remain employed, then we need to be doing more of those. But we did it, we were strategically deploying these concerts in communities and neighborhoods where we had no relationships. And we walked into these neighborhoods and we didn't say, oh, let us bring you the arts. Aren't you lucky that you would, we actually walked into these neighborhoods and said, we're sorry we don't know you well enough. We assume that you know how to celebrate your own cultural identity. How do you do that? Do you have artists in your community that are reflective of your culture, that are of how you define culture, of how you celebrate culture? Let us come into your neighborhood and let us provide the resources, whether that's tent or instruments or amplification or whatever it is. Let us come into the neighborhood. Let us elevate your definition of cultural identity. And in helping you celebrate and in celebrating with you, we will learn. So we spent 2 years doing pop-up concerts. Now, to the naked eye, you would never know that this is a strategic thing that we're doing. To the naked eye, we're just doing pop-up concerts like everybody else. Now, fast forward 2 years, 2022, when for a hot second we could open up again, right? Our venues could open up again. And there was an article in the Calgary Herald that said, despite all the craziness of COVID restrictions, Arts Commons has had the busiest summer and the most revenue-generating summer in its 40-year history. And people are like, how is that even possible? And the answer is, well, we spent 2 years building relationships with people and learning from them, and eventually saying to them, let us reciprocate the hospitality that you showed us. And if we have learned from you, then you will come to our venues, you will come to our theaters, and you will experience something that you've never experienced before because you have changed us. That summer of 2022, we we learned that there was a touring route for South Asian artists that would travel the country. And for whatever reason, they would skip over Calgary. And we called the manager and we said, how about stopping in Calgary? It'll help your economics. It'll be fantastic. So the summer of 2022, between May and September, we did a 13 concert season of South Asian artists that we had never heard of before. My programming team had never heard of them before. But those are the artists that got these community members and audience members to Arts Commons for the very first time. Some even came to downtown Calgary for the very first time because they wanted to experience these artists that reflected their definition of cultural celebration. The question, so to me, there's a question that we always get asked in the arts, which is, please articulate your impact on others. We get that question all the time. And it's a lovely question, and it's a very well-intentioned question. But what I say to people all the time is, I can tell you what our impact is on the communities that surround us. But the bigger question to answer is, what is the impact of the communities on us? Are we humble enough? Are we flexible enough? Are we responsive enough that others can see and experience their influence on us, so that after 2 years of learning from communities in the northeast quadrant of Calgary, they can finally come to downtown and they can finally come to Arts Commons and experience these cultural celebrations, not that are being imposed upon them, but that are meeting them and feeding what it is that they want. The question, I get several accusations from people that read this book. One of them is, people get angry at me and they say, oh, you're calling for the eradication of the programmer. You just want to give people what they want. And I was like, okay, well, hang on, let me take a sip of water. So I have a lot of artistic directors that get angry at me and they're saying, well, what's the point of having a curatorial vision if all you're going to do is give people what they want? My brother-in-law, and I can say this because he's standing right here with the camera, and I've said it to him before. So my brother-in-law is an incredibly brilliant businessman who lives in Orlando, Florida. And he's an entrepreneur, and he created this convention 10 years ago, where what he does is he has a team of people that go onto YouTube, and they figure out, okay, who are the content creators, and I use that phrase specifically, who are the content creators that have anywhere from 1 to 2 million followers? We're going to call them up and we're going to say, we'll give you 15 minutes of stage time to do in person whatever it is that you would do in front of a camera. Brush your teeth, sing a song. He didn't care. Brilliant. 14 to 25-year-olds, whenever they graduate high school, whenever they have a birthday and their parents say to them, do you want to go to Disney World? They say, no, I want to go to this convention. Brilliant. When I was working at Lincoln Centre, he would hear me say all the time, where are the 16 to 24-year-olds? And he was like, I have them. And he was like, if you want them, we can host this convention at Lincoln Centre. And I was like, absolutely not. I refuse. Because if you think about it as a pendulum, if my friend in Berlin with the theater company was one end of the spectrum, then I'm convinced that my brother-in-law is the other end of the spectrum. Yeah. So what I say about curation and programming is we still need to live in the middle. I don't actually call for the eradication of programmers. I don't want to get rid of the artistic directors. But I want curators that can program in dialogue with communities. Because I think ultimately at the end of the day for us, if we are meant to meet and exceed expectations, what business do we have trying if we don't even know what they are to begin with? So to me, there's need to program and there's need, but how do we do it having our finger on the pulse of what matters to people? And that's not something that artistic directors have historically ever been asked to do. I mean, I remember 20 years ago, the artistic director at Lincoln Centre, brilliant woman, she would come up with everything by traveling the world on her own, sitting in an office and saying, this is what I would want to see, and I have amazing taste, so if I do it, then others will come. That was a very valid approach 20 years ago, and it worked for a lot of institutions, but it stopped working. And we can have lots of conversations about why it stopped. We can talk about social media, we can talk about internet, we can talk about the democratization of arts and culture online. But there is something to be said for the fact that we are no longer tastemakers. We are no longer arbiters of excellence. We are conveners. And in order to do that, it requires a completely different muscle. So that's programming. I touched a little bit on earned revenue. So when my student said to me, if I don't pay to go to Lincoln Center, it's not because I'm poor, it's because I don't care. That to me is a reflection on earned revenue. We know for a fact, so coming out of the pandemic, there's a phrase that was coined by the New York Times in 2023 called funflation. And essentially funflation tries to articulate this phenomenon, which is essentially people going into debt to have experiences. In 2010, when I was in New York and we had the economic crisis, the first thing to go were dinners, movies, and sort of arts and culture. Now, something completely different was happening. When faced with the possibility of a recession, but on the heels of 2 to 3 years of social isolation, people were essentially going into debt to have cultural experiences. Taylor Swift had a lot to do with that. Mm-hmm. I literally have a friend in Calgary that paid $6,000 in money he does not have to take his 13-year-old to Vancouver to experience Taylor Swift. But when his favorite Broadway Across Canada show comes to Calgary, he refuses to pay $125. And I said, why? I was like, tell me why. He was like, well, because that will be my daughter's first concert. And we will always have that. And I was like, okay, well then how are we, so there's something about this funflation terms, which, how is it possible that people are literally going into debt to have cultural experiences, and cultural organizations that are meant to bring people together are sitting in an office saying, where are our audiences? And I was like, well, if they're spending money to go see things and they're not spending money on you, that's not a them problem, it's an us problem. And we need to figure it out. So the other important thing about relevance is that it's not only the right thing to do, philosophically and from a mission perspective, it's the only way you will tap into earned revenue. When Nike puts and this is where I go back to like the corporate thing that people hate me for, but like when Nike puts a sneaker on a shelf, they don't design it in a vacuum, mass produce it and cross their fingers and hope it sells. By the time Nike puts a sneaker on a shelf, they have had test groups, focus studies, like they know it's going to sell. If they can do it, why can't we? When we are supposedly the sector that has our finger on the pulse of what matters to people. Now, they call it focus groups, we call it community engagement, or we should call it community engagement. We should have our finger on the pulse of what people want so that when we program, we are meeting or exceeding expectations as defined by them. So that's earned revenue, which is not rocket science. You have a product people want to consume. You have an environment in which people are willing to go into debt to consume it. Why are they not coming to us? Well, because we don't have something they want. The other part of the coin with the revenue is contributed revenue. In my book, I interview the woman that runs Giving Tuesday, the international giving movement. Last year, I think they mobilized over $3 billion across the world. So I interview this woman and I say, you know, talk to me about contributed revenue, because all I hear in our arts world is that giving is down. And she starts laughing at me. And she says, giving is absolutely not down. She says, people are giving more than ever before. Now they're giving differently, and they're giving to different causes. And then she says, you people in the arts world have a phrase that you love to throw around. She says, you're one of the only sectors that I know that uses the phrase donor fatigue. And she says to me, she was like, as somebody that understands and that looks at philanthropy across sectors, she was like, let me tell you, donors are not tired of giving. If they're tired of giving to you, then maybe they're not fatigued of giving, maybe they're just fatigued of you. And I was like, but she didn't mean it as a criticism. She meant as like, okay, how are you going to overcome it? Because people are giving to higher education, people are giving to healthcare, people are giving to humanitarian issues. And they're not giving in the millions, they're mobilizing democratically with an app. if people have the ability to give, and they have the resources to give, and they have the impetus to give, the fact that they're not giving to the arts means that you have not made a strong enough case as to why they should be giving. Another really good lesson for us to take back and be like, okay, how do we tap into it? Last year when we were working on our project, so one of the things that I'm incredibly proud of in Calgary, so the reason we're being called the Werklund Centre, the reason we went from Arts Commons to Werklund Centre, is because last year we announced a $75 million gift from Albertan Dave Werklund and his family. $75 million is the largest philanthropic gift to the performing arts in Canadian history. People in Toronto are livid. And here's somebody that has given to higher ed, here's somebody that has given to healthcare. He has never given to the arts before. And when people say to me, what is the biggest, what excites you the most about this gift? And I was like, well, 75 million is a beautiful number. But what I love the most is the fact that here's an action that is not cannibalizing the philanthropy within the arts. We are literally making the arts pie bigger by welcoming somebody into our sector that had never given before. And in doing so, falling in love with the impact of the arts. And now, do I have hospitals and universities that are angry at me? Maybe. But I'd rather have that problem than have people say to me, you're cannibalizing the arts world. Although we can talk about, actually, universities and hospitals are not angry at me, I'm being facetious. They're actually really excited because there's such a thing as a pipeline of giving. So Dave Werklund gives 75 to us this year. His next big gesture might be a hospital. So it's always, nobody gives just once, there is a pattern. So our goal collectively should not be to figure out, oh, who's giving where, and oh my God, did you see that person got the grant, that means we're not gonna get it. No, it's literally, it's a game of musical chairs. And the solution is to keep philanthropists giving. And knowing that eventually, if we're strategic about it, we might eventually benefit from that generosity. But the reason we were able to tap into Dave's philanthropy, he loves education. Here's somebody that grew up in northern Alberta with a 9th grade education. And he's always said, imagine what, and he's doing fine for himself. But he said, imagine what I could have done if I had actually graduated high school. And so he has been given, if you look at his philanthropy, Olds College, University of Calgary, he has given philanthropy to institutions that can provide people like him experiences that he never had. We were able, in conversation, and by redefining our value proposition and by embodying that value proposition, we were able to convince him and get him on board with the fact that young people having access to the arts is just as basic as a human right as having access to education. And that just tapped into his reason for giving. So it's funny because a lot of people when we announced the gift, a lot of the media and press would say to him, why the arts, why now? And he speaks beautifully about how the arts for the first time had been able to articulate a value proposition that aligned with his desire to make the world a better place. Because that's what philanthropists want to do. We need to give them an opportunity to do that through the arts. And if we're not positioning them, and if we're not positioning ourselves to do that, then they have 20 other phone calls they can make. So that's philanthropy. So we're unpacking this idea of relevance as being in service. And this idea that if we can imagine a world in which the arts are in service to others, yes, with a level of humility, yes, with a level of inquiry, but also with a deep commitment to excellence. Because the other thing I get accused of is, where's excellence in the mix? And I was like, well, excellence can still exist as long as it's in service to something greater than itself. And if we tap into that, then people will want to come, so earned revenue is up. impact can start being, we can start telling the story of impact, and impact is the currency of philanthropy. And that's how you end up with a $660 million project that we broke ground on. So now I'm going to apply some of those lessons that are in the book into our project. So I touched on Dave Werklund, the largest philanthropic gift to the performing arts in Canadian history. Again, value proposition, and a value proposition that aligned with his commitment, long-standing commitment to philanthropy. We have incredible municipal investment. Over $300 million of municipal money has come our way. And I'll unpack that a little bit, because people from all over the world say, how is it, like, they look at it and they're like, oh my God, the city of Calgary has done what? In 2021, in April of 2021, the city of Calgary did something remarkable. They announced a downtown revitalization project. And they announced a $200 million initial investment into revitalizing the downtown. That alone should have made the front page of every newspaper. But what is even more remarkable, and not everybody knows this, but when you look at that initial $200 million investment, the single largest line item in that budget is $80 million for cultural infrastructure. They still had office to residential conversions. They still had all of these other things that are fantastic, but the single largest line item was cultural infrastructure, because they understood that in order to get people to come downtown earlier or stay later or come in on the weekends or, God forbid, even move downtown, you're going to need amenities that people want to stick to. And it's funny, a lot of the developers that are jumping on this office to residential conversion have said to me, they said, this is an amazing incentive, and we are excited about getting people downtown. However, if we get a family or a young couple or a newcomer to Calgary to move into a condo downtown, if within 3 years there are not grocery stores, daycares, or other amenities, they will leave. And so when you look at where these office to residential conversion programs are located in the downtown core of Calgary, it's not an accident that all of them are anchored around cultural institutions. They're either at Werklund Centre, Arts Commons, the Glenbow Museum, Contemporary Calgary, because developers are realizing that they can take the incentive, but if they cannot guarantee some sort of community-based amenity, we're going to lose all those people. So, and it's funny because I just got back from Ottawa, and I finally met with the Ministry of Infrastructure. And they're like, well, we're only talking about housing. If you're not here to talk about housing, then we don't want to meet with you. And I was like, okay, well, did you realize that 80% of the new housing in the downtown core of Calgary is anchored around us, very intentionally? And then they were like, oh, okay, maybe we want to take this phone call. Now, in 2021, what changed for us is that we stopped being an arts project and we started being a city project. I stopped, believe me, nothing I did had anything to do with it, but all of a sudden I was being talked about as a city builder. And I did nothing differently than I did the day before. But the city, and I'm saying this knowing that we have counselors in the room, the city had defined a narrative for itself that necessitated us to succeed. And I now have weekly conversations with the mayor, less so now, but when that first investment came in, she would look at me and say, do not mess this up. And how often is it that you have, like, the dynamic is always the other way around. We're always calling them, we're always coming to you saying, please do this for us. And the city had defined a narrative for itself where all of a sudden the dynamic had shifted, and the politicians were coming to the arts community and saying, we need you. We need you to turn this downtown around. And all of a sudden, when I tell you that our project has benefited from over $300 million of municipally directed funds, it's not because we're some sort of amazing art center, which we are. but it's because we have found ourselves in a position where a narrative is bigger than just us. And I'd like to think that was accidental, but I think as I hear you talk about the district, as I hear you talk, like, every downtown is going through this right now, through some version of this. And so that for us was huge. So that's sort of that's my big takeaway from our municipal, redefining our municipal relationship. Now, from the municipal government, we went to the provincial government. I was like, okay, we got the city money, we got to go to Edmonton next. I'll tell you, the last 5 years, it's like whack-a-mole. I'm like, okay, how do we, and now I'm on Ottawa, so that's a whole new, but we're getting there, we're very close. So we have municipal investment. We have Dave Werklund, who we're working on that relationship. And we have a relationship with a provincial government that when I moved here, I couldn't get them to answer the phone. And it was fascinating to me because, so when I was in New York, when I was at Lincoln Center, I was one of 6 lobbyists at Lincoln Center that was actually allowed to go to Washington, D.C. And talk to politicians. There's something so interesting about the arts and its relationship to politics in North America, and this may seem counterintuitive, but I promise it's not. The arts community tends to do a lot better under conservative governments than it ever does under progressive governments. And I'm looking at your faces right now. Now, so personal politics aside, when you have a sector that is so dependent on earned revenue, on sponsorships, on philanthropy, I would go to Washington, D.C., and I wouldn't actually advocate for direct giving to the arts. I would advocate for tax incentives for the private sector to actually be able to contribute. And the reality is, and this may change, but the reality is when you have a conservative government that gives an indication to the private sector that their ability to generate and retain wealth is more protected than under a progressive government, that is when all of a sudden you have corporations that want to give more. That's when you have families that will go out 3 nights a week instead of 1 night a week. And so it felt so counterintuitive to me to have moved to Calgary, inherited an incredible relationship with the progressive municipal government, and have a conservative provincial government that wouldn't take my phone calls, when at the end of the day, we want the same thing. We want a strong private sector with disposable income that can invest in community, not just the arts, in community. So finally, we're able to open these doors, and I will say, I know that you mentioned, not by name, but Minister Furr. I will say she's one of the most incredible culture ministers I have ever worked with in any country around the world. So the provincial government right now, last year they made an announcement. They invested over $103 million into our project, which I believe outside of the art gallery in Edmonton is the largest investment in a single project. Now, when people ask me, how'd you do that? I said, well, it was a completely different ballgame than playing with the municipal government. We had to go to the provincial government and demonstrate the return on investment. So we worked with Deloitte, and we said, okay, can you help us understand, can you help us craft a narrative around how to demonstrate the return on investment in the arts? Because we have a tendency, and I'm sure many of you will agree, that we are perceived out in community as people that will go out hat in hand and always ask for money. I'm sure there are some of us in this room, myself included, that when I approach a business leader or a politician or a philanthropist walking down the street, they will cross the sidewalk because they see me coming. Because, and this is the other thing I talk about in the chapter on philanthropy, there's philanthropy that begs and there's philanthropy that inspires. And I've always said to my team, anywhere that I've worked, I said, as long as I'm in this office, we will not exercise philanthropy that begs. Philanthropy that begs is a Sarah McLachlan commercial that gets you it pulls on your heartstrings, it forces you to give, And the second you give, you're angry at yourself and you probably won't give again. And then when you hear that song, you're like, it works. Philanthropy that beg works, but it'll work once. The second time you start begging, the third time you start begging, you start losing credibility. The philanthropy that inspires is sustainable if you can sustain the inspiration. So we went to Deloitte and we said, can you help us tell a narrative around how the arts actually have a return on investment? We're not just a cause that is always asking, but that we can demonstrate impact. And we noticed that in the same way that we could tell the story about the office to residential conversion and that our impact that our presence had an impact there, we also know that for every $1 people spend within our building, they're spending an additional 4 to 6 within an 8-block radius. Parking, dinner, daycare, like you name it, the ripple effect is huge. I once had a conversation with the mayor and she said to me, listen, the money that we're giving you for this project could go 10 times farther if you found a plot of land half an hour outside the city. And I was like, yeah, but what's the point? You're gonna have people drive up, park there, and then literally turn around and go home. It was so funny. We did a similar study in New York City at Lincoln Center, and we realized that we compared 2 kinds of activities. We took the Nutcracker, which for those of you that know is sort of like the epitome of Christmas in New York City. Like families, generations of families will spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to go see the Nutcracker. So we studied that, and at Christmas no less, which means that like people are predisposed to spend. So we took the Nutcracker, and then we took our August outdoor festival, which was free to the public. And we had, I think it was McKinsey at the time, we said, can you study the economic impact of these 2 cultural activities? And the assumption was that the high rollers and the big spenders that came to the Nutcracker would have a ripple effect of economic activity within a 10-block radius, and that the people that were coming for free were not going to spend anything, because why would they when they came for free? We learned that the people coming to the Nutcracker were getting dropped off at the door of the theater in their limos or Ubers, and the second it was over, they got back in their car and they went home. The people that were coming for the free festival were taking the subway. They were coming in groups of at least 5, and they would mingle and stay around afterwards. That seems so counterintuitive unless it may not, at the time it did. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, how do we measure the return on investment? So we had this amazing study done by Deloitte that said, okay, government of Alberta, we know we're asking you for a whole lot of money, but here's what you're gonna get back. Job creation, provincial tax, all the things that matter. The other thing we were able to do, and this was fascinating, is we realized that even though capital is the easiest money to give, right? People love giving to capital because it means they can give once, as opposed to operations, which requires this sort of annual commitment. The reason people are scared about capital is because nobody wants to build the beast they're gonna have to feed for the rest of their lives. So understandably, government was very nervous when we said, we're gonna go from having a 560,000 square foot facility to over 1 million. And they're like, well, hang on a second. We can give you a one-time payment to help you build it, but does that mean that your annual ask is gonna double because you've gotten bigger? Because if that's the case, we may not give. Part of our study, as we grow our campus, we did this really interesting study of saying, okay, if we doubled our square footage, but we had a different approach to what we call community and commercial activity, could we generate a different kind of earned revenue and ultimately decrease our dependency on government funds? So we were actually able to demonstrate to the government of Alberta that by building this 1 million square foot facility, because of how we plan on using it with community and the private sector and others, that our dependency on government funds is actually going to decrease by 26% year over year.
Wow.
That was music to their ears. I mean, honestly, it should be music to all of our ears, because it means that all of a sudden we are more self-sustainable. So what got us experiencing success municipally was very different than what got us experiencing success provincially. Federally, we're in it right now. The reason I have bags under my eyes is because my goal is to be in the fall budget, and we're this close. But if you think about it, we have the right story in the right place at the right time. The government of Canada has said to us for years, we will come to the table, but when you have your ducks in a row. I was like, okay, ducks are in a row, check. Previous government, probably not a lot of incentive to give to Western Canada or Alberta. Current one, very different. They talk about nation building projects, and I'm like, we broke ground on one. They talked about a major projects office for the country, headquartered in Calgary, and I'm like, so it's so funny how this idea, this commitment to relevance, which is terrifying because it means that like you are open to anything that will happen. 8 months ago, I was convinced we would have to do this without the government of Canada. And now the table, I mean, listen, nothing's guaranteed, but the tables have turned. And we have municipal funding, record amount of municipal funding. We have record amount of provincial funding. We certainly have record amount of individual and private sector funding. That is the kind of story that will move governments. So I share this because it's a game, first of all, of trying to figure out, do we matter to people? If we had never answered that question, no money would have come in. We might have had some municipal funding, but it would have gone nowhere. So the first thing is, do we matter to people? What is our value proposition? How are we in service to others? And by the way, in the book I mentioned, you don't have to be building a $600 million project to figure out a better value proposition. Interestingly enough, the very last chapter is on leadership. And I get told all the time, well, of course you can do this. You're giant, you're Arts Commons, you're this, you're that. And I was like, yeah, but stop and think about it for a second. We are dealing, like the currency of relevance is relationships. The larger the institution, this is a generalization, but the larger the institution, the more removed it is from community. In the book, I interview a woman who runs an organization called the Laundromat Project. And it's an organization in the Bronx that started in the 70s or 80s, I believe. And essentially, it wanted to disrupt the status quo so bad that it took artists into laundromats in the Bronx. Like, that is how sad the state of affairs is, that taking an artist into a laundromat is innovative. And so I argue that the smaller the institution, the more nimble it is. And the more nimble it is, the more responsive it is. And so when people say to me like, oh, well, it's easy for you to talk about this because you're large and it's Arts Commons and it's and I was like, yeah, but you don't understand. We've had this success in spite of that narrative, not because of it. The smaller the institution, the more nimble these relationships, the more readily an institution can respond. That is the currency of relevance. And so if we can do it, being this large mammoth of an institution, then the smaller the institution, the easier it is to do that. I believe it and I see it every day. So I am critical of our sector, very critical of it, but I'm also very excited about it because clearly we can do things, we can turn it around. You know, to counselors' opinions earlier, what's the point of having community if we're not celebrating culture? Right? I mean, people have said to me, as I learned about Calgary, I'm preaching to the choir, but like, if I hear one more time, I moved to Calgary with a 3-year contract 35 years ago, right? It's this idea that like, okay, we came for work and we stayed for culture. At that time, culture was defined in very different ways, right? I have corporate sponsors right now that say to me, 20 years ago, I used to sponsor the Flames, because my entire workforce were young men. And they said, we will continue to sponsor the Flames, but as we diversify our workforce and as we attract young families from around the country, and we have a lot of young women in our workforce, it means that we are going to have to put our corporate social responsibility to work in different ways. So they say, now we're supporting the zoo. Now we're supporting education. Yes, we still have our box at the arena, but how we celebrate and define culture is changing, and we have a role to play in that. And it cannot be, it's not about saying, oh my God, the Flames. It's like saying, no, we are big enough for both of these things. And that's the other thing. We have a tendency in our world, in our sector, to feel like we need to be pinned up against each other. And I'll never forget this. I was in New York meeting with a donor, and they said, God, I'm so tired of the arts community. And I was like, well, tell me more. Why are you so tired of the arts community? I was like, because watching you all fight amongst yourselves is so discouraging. They were like, I don't give to an organization, I give to a sector. As a philanthropist, as a sponsor, I may choose to give to one organization, but at the end of the day, I'm choosing to invest in a sector. And they said to me, but I don't think you understand how discouraging it is to watch that sector and all of your infighting, and it's actually discouraging me from wanting to give to your sector at all, when I can go to the post-secondaries and they're at least talking to each other. So I think there's a lot that we need to do differently as a sector. I think other sectors are proving for us that there is a way out, whether it's looking at libraries and their value proposition, whether it's looking at hospitals and their relationship to donors. The irony is that nobody has the currency of storytelling like we do, right? Nobody can celebrate the way we do. And so I think to myself, if libraries can do that and hospitals can do that and universities can do that, and they're not even in the business of storytelling, imagine what we could do if we got out of the way. So I'm critical, but I'm also incredibly optimistic. The things that I get criticized for the most, and I mentioned the first one is, you're advocating for getting rid of the programmer, and hopefully I put that to rest. The other thing I get criticized for the most is,
people say to me, like colleagues of mine say to me, we really don't like it when you advocate for the survival of the fittest mentality.
that's not me, that's the way the world works. Like one of the things I feel terrible about even saying out loud, when I reflect on my time in New York in the 2009-2010 economic crisis, watching the organizations that made it out the other end of that crisis are the organizations that figured it out. The organizations that just sat still and said, we're gonna wait it out, are the organizations that didn't make it through. And in hindsight, I'm kind of okay with that. And it's horrible to think about because a lot of those organizations were friends of mine. But survival of the fittest is not some sort of ethos that that is true for everybody. And so we need to figure out what our path forward is as a sector. We need to understand and I'm not here to tell you all how Red Deer operates because I'm a guest in your town, but I'm convinced that some of the questions that we've asked ourselves, if they are answered in the context of Red Deer with the right leaders around the table, then the solution that Red Deer comes up with will be unlike anything anybody has ever seen before. And people will be studying you. I've done a lot of talking. And I apologize, I just get on the soapbox, literally. But I do love conversation more than just talking. And so I'm actually looking forward to the next half hour so much more than I did the past 60 minutes.
Well, we've had fun.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
All right.
Alrighty, okay, so thank you. That was
Was that okay?
It was amazing.
Okay,
oh my
good.
gosh. I've only read the book like 4 times. And so I appreciate some of the news stories and things too that have been coming to the fore. So that was really wonderful. So we do have time for some questions, and I have a microphone. And so if you want to put your hand up, I will come bring the microphone to you. You do not need to be on camera. You can stand up and say your question, and we will also have a timekeeper so that we can also have the fun, mingly part of the conversation night too. So does anybody have a question right now? Okay.
I hope it's a hard question. All right, good.
Hi, thank you so much. My question is, can you point to any evidence that shows a link between education and increased arts income on tickets and such?
I can't. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So let me ask you again. So like you're talking, is your question, can you link like spending on arts and culture to a level, like, so somebody with a post-secondary degree spends more money on arts and culture than somebody with a 10th?
No.
Okay.
Let me rephrase the
Okay,
question.
good.
So I think you had said that when programming includes education,
Yes, okay.
that translates into more patrons?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, absolutely. So when people ask me, so when I say to folks, the role of the programmer is to keep the finger on the pulse of what people want. And people are like, well, how do we do that? I'm not told how to do that in school when I go to arts management programs. And then I point to education programs. When I was in New York, and because my background's in education, there are 2 schools of thought. I mean, I'm sure there are more, but there are 2 in my mind. There are those institutions that will use education as an extension of marketing, literally to get butts and seats, is their phrase. That to me is horrible. That to me is audience development. That to me is saying, we're not at fault. What we do on stage is great. If you don't come, it's because there's something wrong with you, so I got to train you when you're 4 to drink our Kool-Aid. However, when arts education is done right, it's actually what I think of as an institutional tentacle that is going out into community. And instead of actually just pushing our product on people, it's actually engaging in high quality arts education, and we can talk about the research around arts education for days, because that does exist. But when our programming team is trying to figure out what we put on stage for the next 2 years, our education program is our education staff is at that table. Because the programmers in our world that tend to say, well, how should I know what people want? The education person in the room is like, well, let me tell you what they want, because I'm out in classrooms working with kids and teachers and parents 5 days a week. I know. So education isn't only the right thing to do in terms of providing that service and providing arts education programs. If an institution is smart about it, it will also use it as a mechanism to learn about what communities actually care about. I actually have a huge problem with education programs that cost money. So I guess there are a couple of different trains of thought. There's the butts and seat marketing. There's the earned revenue mechanism, which says, well, if we run a summer camp and charge an arm and a leg, then it's that's the earned revenue that we need to put on 3 shows this season. I'm not opposed to that if that's what you call it, like if you are unapologetically transparent about it. But to me, the magic of education is about providing equitable access to these opportunities and these experiences. And when you talk about equitable access, a pay-to-play model is not equitable or accessible. So to me, it's so important for me that at Arts Commons, or at Lincoln Center before, all of our arts education programs were free to families. It's the right thing to do in terms of, and again, having cultural celebrations, and this is actually according to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Experiencing cultural celebration is a basic human right as defined by the UN. when you have arts organizations that are the gatekeepers to those experiences and are not providing them, I take issue with that. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to lose money on these programs because, again, in the world of philanthropy, there is far more philanthropy that will go into education than will ever go into the arts. When I was working in New York before Lincoln Center, I worked for an organization that didn't understand arts education. And they said to me, we can't keep doing these programs for free because our main stage shows are suffering. And I was like, yeah, because they suck. And so this idea that the arts work was supporting the education work was so backwards to me. By the time I left 2 seasons later, the education department was the single largest source of contributed revenue to the company. It was our 15% overhead that we were charging foundations that was going to pay for the shows that sucked. So there's still a way of making it equitable and accessible and high quality without it being a drain on the bottom line, and without it being unsustainable. Did I answer any of your question?
You inspired many more questions.
Oh, good, okay, good, good.
Next hand up. Okay, Allison.
Hi,
Hi.
I was really impressed by your talk. My key takeaways are that we need to, as artists and as a community, we need to have, sorry,
It's okay.
I get really nervous because of this microphone.
You're doing great. You don't need the microphone.
No, it's just that, I know you had said that, you kind of debunked my first question that I had during, the first part of your, talk, but, that, that a large organization like Arts Commons can do this, and then you said that maybe it works even better at a smaller level, and I'm just thinking here in Red Deer we're much smaller than Calgary, and I'm just wondering if you think that this works at a very small level, like for just communities of artists, and if this maybe works better if communities of artists and organizations and the city are all working together to make the arts more relevant in our city.
Yes. So there are a couple of things that you make me think about when I hear your comments. The first one is you said community of artists, and I very intentionally, and perhaps to a fault, in my book don't really talk about artists. And it's funny because I was writing my book at the same time that Rick Rubin published his book, The Creative Act. Is that what it's called? And The Creative Act, which is a book by Rick Rubin, which is, I think everybody should read, speaks to, it's almost, if my book is a call to action for arts institutions, his book is a call to action to artists. And these two books could not be more different. Yeah.
Actually, sorry, I guess maybe you misunderstood me. What I took away from this is that the audience is the one that's important.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like the artists themselves.
Yeah. Yes, and. So the artist, I actually find that artists think about relevance all the time. Like you think about, like if you're an artist, I don't want to speak for you, but chances are that you think about how your piece will exist in the world and how it will outgrow you and outlive you. And that in many ways is thinking about relevance. So ironically, artists, I think, grapple with relevance all the time. Institutions, however, do not. And institutions, ironically, that were built to be these conveners of artists and audiences are actually getting it wrong. And for a moment during the pandemic, you remember during the pandemic, you didn't need arts institutions. You would go online. Artists were doing work on Zoom. And that was so fascinating to me. So I think it can be done, because at the end of the day, the relationship, as you point out, between artists and audiences is much healthier. And I would argue sometimes even better, without an institution trying to get in the middle and messing it all up.
I think this is very important for Red Deer, I think that there's a lot to be learned, and I haven't read your book, so I will be reading it. I do have a copy at home, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For this.
Thanks. I see. Okay. We have Jenna, and then Aaron, and then Bailey, and then Shannon.
Oh my God. I wish I could remember all those names.
You spoke about like relevance.
Hang on, where are you? Sorry.
At the,
Hi.
at the back
Hi.
by the cameras.
It's okay. I hear a voice. Yeah.
Camera. You talked about relevance with Arts Commons, and it's been an institution for years. When you came to Arts Commons, beyond just the like pop-up concerts, what other things did you explore beyond your values to kind of recreate that relevance within the community and people? And what are you doing now to like continue as an institution and as a community place
Yeah.
to kind of redefine that as being as old as you are? Not you, but
I'm not that old.
as Arts Commons.
As Arts Commons, it's actually, we're exactly
He was
the-
under 40 only a couple of years
Yeah,
ago.
I know. We're actually, Arts Commons and I are pretty much the same age. That's a great question. During the pandemic, so in addition to doing the pop-up concerts, which again is not rocket science, everybody was doing them. I just wanted to let you in on sort of the secret behind the scenes as to why we were doing them and how we were doing them. The other thing we did, for example, we partnered with the convention center across the street from us. They were a temporary shelter. And we were like, we have 560,000 square feet. We have dressing rooms. We have all this space. And the convention center is that capacity. So we said, sure, let's be an extension and an overflow of the shelter. That's one example of like, here's something that a performing arts center probably never would have done before if it had only ever seen its mandate as an artistic mandate. What I love about our mission, so when you think about it, and this is probably, hopefully not too much inside baseball, but Arts Commons, for example, last year hosted over 2,000 events within 365 days. It makes us one of the most active performing arts centers in North America. Our model is such that we have resident companies. We have the Calgary Philharmonic Orchestra, we have Theatre Calgary, and we have hundreds of community groups that sometimes rent our facilities, whether at commercial rates or community rates. But what I'm saying is, of the 2,000 events that we host within our facility, 80% are outside of our control, which is terrifying. But that's really important, because I think about, we are a very different model than, for example, the National Arts Centre in Ottawa. The National Arts Centre, similarly large, similarly active, but the vast majority of activities report into one office. The French theater, the English theater, the orchestra. And I think to myself, no one office, no one brain should ever be responsible for 2,000 events a year. And there's something that I love about our model, as dysfunctional and as crazy as it is. But when I talk to people about our model, I actually talk about the democratization of arts and culture. The fact that 80% of 2,000 events could be programmed without us having any say, I think is remarkable. Last year, within a month, we had a Palestinian comedian and a celebration of Jewish violence. Now, it was fine, But when you have a space that can be used that way, I actually find that very beautiful. And so there's something inherent in our business model that we have never talked about historically, but we're talking about it as the future of Werklund Centre, which is we want that narrative around the democratization of arts and culture. As we double in size, we're not doubling the number of resident companies. We're not doubling the number of programming that we're responsible for. We're going to be increasing the kinds of activities that we can facilitate with and for Calgarians and with arts organizations. So there are a lot of small examples that we can point to in terms of like, here are ways in which our value proposition is manifesting. I mean, I could talk, we have the first Canadian Indigenous woman to ever become an architect working on our project. Like, there are decisions that are made day in and day out that I think reflect this commitment. I mean, we're working on a reconciliation strategy, the kinds of which I've never seen before, and that to me is probably the most fulfilling part of the job, is working with elders and understanding how finding parallels between Indigenous ways and Western ways and how it can inform our business model. Like, that to me is fascinating. So it's opening ourselves up to questions. But I think if we do it right, if we do this campus right, not just design-wise, but operationally, I think it will be a beautiful thing, because ultimately we are a place where Calgary can celebrate who it wants to be tomorrow, but also host the conversations that are shaping it for the future. And not because we're curating it, but we're just the place where that's taking place. Like, that is to me, that's the epitome of this philosophy. And here's what's frustrating, is that if we get it right, nobody will talk about it, because it'll just feel like Calgary's front yard, and that's success. I can't see your face, so I don't know if I'm answering your question or not.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Okay.
All right, Erin.
You've snuck up on me.
Oh, sorry.
The Red Deer theater scene specifically is very small, and many of these organizations are what you would call nimble, extremely nimble.
Okay.
One
Like extremely small?
Sized nimble from time to time. And I saw sort of two sides to your efforts that I wrote down as organizing yourself as an institution, and then on the other side, making sure the art no longer sucks, in your terms. And I fear my organization is so nimble, I don't know which head of the dragon to slay first. Please don't say both. Must I organize as an institution, or shall I make some art that doesn't suck so much?
Why are they mutually exclusive?
Because they aren't. Tell me more. What did I do first? I wrote disorganized and a little sucky at the moment.
Okay, hang on.
Oh my God, Erin, I love you. I'm one of her board members.
Now, okay, let's talk about the sucky part first.
Just a little.
Just a little. I probably go see 5 shows a week. Like, I'm out every night seeing shows. I know when I go out to see something for myself versus I know when I go out to see if our business model is working. When I go see something for myself, it's for me. I don't want anybody to know that I'm there. I'll sit in the back. I just enjoy. But when I'm there analyzing whether something or not sucks, I'm not looking at the stage. Like, my team knows that, to me, a successful cultural event has nothing to do with whether or not I think what was on stage sucked. I will sit in the theater and I will actually look out at the audience, and if the audience is connecting, and if they're responding, and if they are, and I'm preaching to the choir, you have all been in a theater where you can feel that magic. I don't care what is on stage that is resulting in that, as long as that happens. That's why, to me, relevance is so context-driven. what is relevant to what, and again, generalizing, but what is relevant to a Theatre Calgary audience may not be relevant to somebody that goes to the high performance rodeo, right? It doesn't mean something sucked. It just means that maybe you put the wrong show in front of the wrong people. Because to me, success is whether or not there's that connection happening. So the whole sucky part, there's so much more to it than just, is it bad or is it good? When people ask me, what did you think? I was like, well, I can speak to, because I'm a trained theater maker, I can speak to whether or not I think the piece accomplished what it set out to do. But that's not my job. There are theater people that, my job is to make sure that people in the audience are having that magical time. And there are some times when I sit and I did this on Sunday, I went to a show that shall remain nameless, where I sat there and I said to myself, what the fuck is happening? But I looked around and people were having the best times of their lives. That was an incredibly successful event. It just wasn't for me. So I would say organizing, you cannot separate organizing from the suckiness, because organizing requires you to figure out who is your community, who are you organizing for and with. And if you are feeling like you have a sucky product, you're probably not organizing correctly.
Yes.
Yes, and
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah.
And the name of the book that you said, if yours is addressing arts institution, this book was addressing.
So it's Rick Rubin. So Rick Rubin is the author, and I think it's called The Creative Act or The Creative Way. Does somebody know? You can Google it. I'm convinced it's Rick Rubin. Yeah.
Thank you.
And what I hate about that book,
I actually, it's a pretty big book, and I read it in one sitting. The first half was super compelling, until halfway through the book he says, the artist should not care about what the audience has to think. And I was like, well, and I was like, but that's where I was like, oh, we are coming at this from such different perspectives. Because his whole thing is, if you are an artist, like, your job is to be the conduit through which these stories are being told. The exercise of being a successful artist is very different than the exercise of being a successful arts organization. My job is not to be an artist. I could never do it. I tried. I sucked. But my job as an arts administrator is to make sure that I have the right people at the right experience. And that requires me to hold these two things in tension in a way that an artist maybe doesn't have to. That's maybe what Rick Rubin is saying.
Cool. Go ahead, Bailey.
Trying to follow up that question.
No, you can do it.
I was wondering, does social movement learning theories have any effect on kind of, or have they a place in accessing communities that are maybe outside of your normal reach? Or even within it?
Repeat the question.
Does social movement learning theories inform or have a place in accessing a community's desires or needs?
Yeah. Although I would argue, by the time you organize around a social movement, it's probably too late.
More so the theory than a movement itself. Because there's a lot of learning theories.
I don't know. You would have to educate me on what some of those theories are. I did some work. So if you're familiar with the work of Augusto Boal in Brazil, he's the guy that invented a movement called Theater of the Oppressed. His whole thing was, if theater is a reflection of our lives, then if we can invite audience members into the reflection to change the reflection, are we empowering them to change their real lives? Talk about social movement and arts coming together. I have never seen that kind of movement be operationalized around within an institution. But I don't know how to answer your question because I don't know that I fully understand it, but that's on me.
Hey, we're all learning here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got 2 quick questions.
Okay.
The first part is, I'm actually from Rimby, which is 2,500 people and about 45 minutes. Is there a way for us to tie into you until we get built? Because it's a pretty little place and it's pretty little everything. And do you guys have some sort of an outreach program? Because I know in Rimby, we don't qualify in Edmonton or Calgary. We're on our own for just about everything that I try to apply for. So is there a way to satellite in for small communities?
See, this is fascinating to me. One of the things that we did, so to answer your question, you still there? Yeah. No, but I'm now, look at me, I'm connecting the dots. So one of the things that we tried doing during the pandemic, which we thought was tapping into our ethos, was we invested over $1 million of digital technology into our theaters so that we could live stream, live edit, live direct, live everything. And we did for a couple of things. And here's where we landed on trying to make sense of that, because ultimately we figured out we are for the live experience. When I was at Lincoln Center, the Met Opera came out with the Met Opera HD in movie theaters. And the whole logic there, for those of you that remember, when the Met Opera came out with this HD thing in movie theaters around the world, all the local opera companies freaked out because they said, my audience in Paris is going to stop buying my tickets when they can go to the movie theater for $20 and go see the Met Opera. What ended up happening is the exact opposite. When you get people excited, then they will want to go see the thing live. We tried that during the pandemic to say, okay, is there a way that we can overcome the geographic barrier? Because to me, the 3 barriers are geographic, financial, and perceived. And I was like, this digital technology is going to help us overcome the geographic barrier. It didn't, I don't think, although maybe we can try it out again. I would much rather find a way of supporting a local organization in building capacity than just swooping in and offering something and then leaving. I could change my mind tomorrow, but that's where I'm. Because ultimately, it's also, to me, it's about, it needs to be local, right?
I agree with that, and yet, when I think about provincially speaking, one of the things that I find community-wise is because we've become very proud of ourselves in Alberta for being, I'm from Calgary, so I'm for the Flames, and I'm from, that whole thing has become, it's almost divided the entire province in some ways. Mm-hmm. And here we have something that is the biggest thing happening in the province. Why aren't we including the whole province in multiple ways we can? And including that culture into Calgary's, because it goes out from Calgary and comes in.
Correct, if we're doing it right, yeah.
So the second question.
Yeah.
I'm also a neurodivergency advocate and an artist.
Good.
So when I think about this great big building, and like I make art from music, so you're actually way up my alley.
Good.
And so when I think about neurodivergency, one of the issues that the neurodivergent community has is things are inaccessible because of simple things like the lights are too bright or the noise is too much, which of course in a concert situation you're going to have. But I started thinking about accessibility differently. I make art from live music.
Okay.
Right? And I make fractal art. So a drummer who is also works with deaf kids, asked me to show the kids what their music looked like.
That's beautiful.
And then we started talking about how they could experience concerts and how those things could happen. Do you have anything that's built in where if we had a concert, the kids can listen through the floor and their feet? And do we have a thing, like, is there stuff being built into this spectacular thing?
Yes.
That allows for a broader community?
Yes. So much, but like, oh my God, we could talk about this for days. A lot of that, like I think about the work that we do through the lens of hardware and software. There are a lot of things that we're doing from a hardware perspective that are going to transform accessibility. Like we just installed in every corner of our current building a new Sennheiser technology that if you have a Bluetooth enabled hearing device, and if you, through your phone, give us permission, our Wi-Fi will follow you around the building, and you can tap into microphones that are spread out across, and you can actually control your experience from your own phone. But that same technology allows you to stand in front of a gallery, hit a button on your phone, and hear the voice of the artist in your ear telling you about that experience. So like so the hardware, the technology can be used in a variety of different ways. The software I find far more inspiring. So for example, for those of you that have been to Arts Commons, you may or may not know that in the Jack Singer Concert Hall, we have one of the largest pipe organs in Canada. Now, today, the Jack Singer is empty. We actually have a program where we bring in neurodiverse kids and their parents and teachers. And watching them play the organ and feel like, to know that their physical actions are having an impact on the environment and they can feel themselves vibrate as a result. I can't explain it because that's not my world, but to have parents and teachers, so that hardware has been in the building for 40 years. We've just never known to make it accessible that way. So a lot of it is hardware and capital things that we need to improve on, but a lot of it is just saying, come on in and let's figure it out together. Because it's a commitment to accessibility rather than hiding behind, oh, we don't have certain toys.
And you have given me such a grant.
Oh, good.
Usually when you're coming into contact with people who can make decisions, neurodivergency is literally something that they say, pardon? Mm-hmm. Instead of actually understanding that it's just a way people are and a way that we can, like the idea of a pipe organ, can I come and hang out with you?
Sure. So here's what we did. The reason we learned to do this is because during the pandemic, we realized that there is a huge pipe organ community in Alberta. And we have this beautiful pipe organ. So we literally created a Google form that people from anywhere could go sign up and literally sign up for 2 hours at a time. And people would drive in from like across Canada for like 2 hours with this pipe organ. And then we accidentally stumbled upon the fact that neurodivergent kids are having this visceral experience with the vibrations. So, but we stumbled across that because we made the pipe organ accessible to anybody that wanted to play with it, which goes against everything we've been told about pipe organs, is that you need to be classically trained in it. And I was like, yeah, that's great, but it's collecting dust. And literally pipe organs need to be played, and if they're not played, even badly, the maintenance of it on it later on is super expensive.
Bravo, that's so awesome.
Thanks. But it's not rocket science. Thank you for acknowledging it. But here's the other thing that drives me crazy about when I share these examples. I share this example where 3 years ago, Arts Commons, the Calgary Phil and Theatre Calgary produced the world premiere of this ragtime musical with the Boston Pops. And I was like, it's the first time in our 40-year history that these three organizations work together. And people are like, bravo, oh my God. I'm like, no, shame on us that it took 40 years to figure that out. Shame on us that it took 40 years to figure out that anybody can come play the pipe organ. Like, thank you for acknowledging it. I'm not angry at you, but thank you for acknowledging it. But also, like, the bar is so low. And we are to blame. Nobody else to blame but us. So true. Yeah.
Amazing. Oh,
Can I ask one tiny more question?
I'm here.
go
So how
for
do we get
it.
on the list of performers as such?
For the pipe organ?
No,
Oh,
for in this building. When are you opening up
so,
things to actually, and what's your plans?
so the plans, so there are three aspects to construction. We have a new building across the street. So if you're familiar with the site, Olympic Plaza is now essentially being divided into two parcels. The smaller parcel has a new building, which will have new theaters. And then Olympic Plaza will be a reimagined outdoor gathering space that celebrates the Olympic legacy, but is far more accessible. So that's construction phase 1, construction phase 2. Both of those are under construction right now and will open in 2028. What we're doing now, and this is what keeps me up at night, is even though, because our fundraising is ahead of schedule, we could technically start renovating our current facility today. But if we do that, and we decommission 6 theaters in downtown Calgary, all hell would break loose. So we're very intentionally staggering it so that we bring the new venues online first, so that we have spaces where we can displace some of the activity while we renovate our facility. Yeah, that's going to be, building the new stuff is easy. It's understanding how we're going to figure it out. Yeah, but that's the fun start. It's all in the timing. Yeah.
Okay, one last question from the audience, and then don't worry, there's no going
No, we're gonna hang out.
More opportunities to chat. Laura. I want to give you a little context first before I ask my question.
Yeah.
We're a city of about 100,000 plus. We've surveyed audiences, or even when you're looking at your list of who's bought tickets. If we eliminate the friends and family factor, I came because I'm related to or good friends with somebody who's involved with the show, it leaves a very, very small percentage left. So I'm thinking about that with respect to your answer to Aaron's question about watching the audience and seeing how they're responding. When you know that 80% of the people there are grandma, aunt, uncle, etc., I think
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, but I kind of want to then dovetail back to something you said very, very early on, and that is how vitally important it is for us to be paying attention to people who are not coming.
Yeah.
And the strategies that we can come up with to try and connect with that portion of our community, because I think once we get more of those people, then watching audience response becomes more and more relevant.
More informative. Yeah. It's hard to read grandma's face and know what she's thinking. Yeah. The other thing, and listen, like I do not claim to be an expert on Red Deer or Alberta, but I also but this is the kind of like fun brainstorming, although that's not a word we should be using anymore, like experimenting. I stop in Red Deer. I was in Red Deer 3 times last week on my way to and from Edmonton.
Please tell me you stopped at more than just the donut mill.
Yes.
Thank you.
But I did stop at the donut mill all 3 times. Also, I've not been, so my wife just spent 3 weeks doing Arts Trek, and she was like, oh my God, we need to go spend more time in Red Deer. So I'm not an expert, but I think to myself, okay, what do we have and I talk about we as if I'm already part of the Red Deer community. But like, we are strategically located halfway between Edmonton and Calgary. It took me an hour and a half to drive up here, if that, during rush hour. I drive very fast sometimes too. But people will travel for things that they've never experienced before. If Red Deer said, we're going to do this crazy thing that doesn't exist anywhere else, I promise you, people will come from Calgary and people will come from Edmonton. Like, I think to myself, there are these anomalies in the performing arts world. And I think to myself, like, okay, things like Sleep No More. So if you that know, like Sleep No More was this experience in New York where it was off the beaten track. They had taken over this warehouse, and it was essentially the story of a Shakespeare play that I cannot name on this stage right now. But it was fully immersive. You were wandering this warehouse with a mask as performers engaged with you. Like, Calgary doesn't have that, Edmonton doesn't have it. If Red Deer said, we're gonna do this and we're gonna do it really good, and we're gonna leave it open enough so that people have time to discover it and realize they want it, within a year, watch people drive to Red Deer to have this experience. Like, there's nothing preventing, like, I think about, Cirque du Soleil, where they have their headquarters in Montreal. It's not centrally located, but you go there because you get to experience something that you don't experience anywhere else. I don't know what that thing is, but I know that Red Deer you can either think of Red Deer as being super isolated or conveniently located between two major markets.
I like the last one.
Yeah.
All right. The staff has asked me to ask a question, which hopefully will give others some other food for thought too. What would you say are the easy wins in being relevant?
The easy wins in being relevant are like, I find that most of the time people want to tell you what they think. So like, being relevant is being responsive. And it's easy to be responsive because people actually want to share. People are irrelevant, not because people don't share, they're irrelevant because they don't listen. So the easiness, I think, is about conversations are waiting to be had if we just sit down and figure out how to have them. Cool. That's an easy win, but it's also the most complicated one.
Yes, no question. Okay, so thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so there's a quotation here that Scott provided, which is, the audacity of relevance challenges us to rethink what it means to stay meaningful in today's cultural landscape. So on that note, here's what I want to tell everybody. We're very grateful that you've come to visit Red Deer, and we definitely hope you'll come and stick around.
Thank you for having me.
Visit us. You can come down to the office down the street tomorrow, and we'll show you what we do otherwise.
All right.
There's all sorts of cool things.
Scott.
Next time you come, maybe you'll discuss the second half of the book. We only got through the first couple chapters.
Well.
Yeah. I talk about leadership. Design is irrelevant because I don't want people thinking that like you need to be designing something. I wrote the book so long ago, I don't remember.
Okay, so for the mingling, there is food over there. Please enjoy. There is the bar. It is open until 9:30? 9:30. We're out of here by 10:30. So please feel free to swing a few chairs around, have a little circle conversation. We do have some sticky notes out front and a big white poster on the wall, the corkboard on the outside of the building. So if you wanted to take a thought with you, leave a thought on our little poster, please feel free to do that. There's lots of pens out there. We would love to continue these conversations because the Arts and Culture District Collaborative and the Downtown Neighborhood Alliance and other creative initiatives in the city, like the What's on Stage reddeer.ca website that's launching very soon, which is our new theater initiative with all of the companies in town. Yeah, we are just, there's lots of amazing things happening in town, and we hope that you will join us and continue this progress forward. So I do want to again thank you to the City of Red Deer and for Alberta Culture Days grant funding that helped make this possible. And as I say, the bar will remain open. Please stick around, have a chat. When you do go home safely, and thank you all very much for attending this evening. We're really grateful to have you here. And keep talking about it.
Is my mic still on?
Your mic is still on.
Sorry. In regards to Lori's question, and I think this is somebody that's come up before, the city of Austin, Texas, not too long ago was having similar conversations. We're too small, we're too this, we're too that, like, and then before you know it, something like South by Southwest put it on the map. Now, there are some people in Austin that will say it took it too far. So careful what you wish for. But there is something very cool and underdoggy of a town that is smaller and unassuming. Like, people expect it from Toronto and New York, and part of the reason why what's happening in Calgary is so fun is because nobody saw it coming. If that could happen in Calgary, just imagine what nobody can see coming from Red Deer. Like that's really interesting to me.
In April, we had our first ever hat parade, and we were one of 4 cities in Canada. There was like Toronto, Brampton, and I think Vancouver, but otherwise it was Red Deer. So
there you go.
We kind of put ourselves on the map.
Don't have to wear fancy hats.
Anyways, I just want to share back to the thought that in my mind was just, I'm going to take these microphones up.